Have you ever had your child tell you they saw a glowing figure, a fairy, an invisible friend no one else could see? Maybe your first instinct was to tell them it's just their imagination, or they're pretending, or they're making it up. But what if it wasn't just their imagination? In this episode, we're talking about children who see into the spiritual realm and why our job isn't to shut it down, but to make it safe for them to explore. I'll share what happens when we dismiss these gifts and what's possible when we actually step in to the space, when we meet them with presence, with curiosity, with love, with ritual. Let's allow our children and step into their inner world with reverence and honor and not fear. I'm Dr. Diana, a mystical mama, intuitive healer, and a guide for mothers raising magical, highly sensitive, intuitive, and gifted children. After moving through postpartum depression and a deep soul journey to reclaim my own intuitive gifts, while navigating the beautiful chaos of motherhood, I found profound healing through ancestral wisdom, spiritual practices, and honoring the sacred in everyday life. Through this podcast and my work, I support other mothers and parents in remembering their power, nurturing their intuition, and creating spiritual legacies with their children. This is a space for healing, remembering, and growing together in both the mystical and the practical world. I will never forget that my biggest prerogative as a mother raising young children has been to never let them forget their magic, to never be disconnected from that, especially as they get older. That was one of the things I never want them to lose. For example, a lot of times we uh, teach our children or share with our children some of the cultural age-old principles of imaginatory figures or people who come, like the tooth fairy, like Santa Claus. And then after a certain age, they start not believing, right, in the tooth fairy, or they start not believing in Santa Claus anymore. There's like a cutoff age for that. And for me, like, we don't teach our children about Santa Claus because one of my love languages is gifts. And so I really try to teach them about being intentional with who gave them gifts and who they give gifts to, just to really, be in tune with the person, right, that they're receiving it from, or they're deciding to give it to. So, but they do believe in the tooth fairy, and they do believe in fairies. And I remember my daughter's about to be 8 now, and I remember at some point, I think around like the 5, 6 year mark, where I started recognizing, oh my gosh, as she starts to get older, some of these things may be either long forgotten, or a friend may just pop the bubble of saying, these things are no longer real. And then they start believing that, right? And so for me, because I deeply believe that staying in tune with the mystical, with the ethereal world is so important, even as adults, that I didn't want my children to be disconnected from that. And so since that like realization, I started being a little bit more intentional with um, how I communicate and how I nurture the magical aspects of childhood, and continue to intentionally nurture that as a result. And so one of the things that I would never forget this, I think my daughter was about 5 years old, and she's really into fairies, still is. And I remember we were just sitting down, just snuggling, and we were talking about fairies and some kind of sharing stories about it or something like that. And she looked out the window and it was dark. And she looked out the window and she saw some kind of glowing light, whether it was the reflection from, the inside to the outside, or she actually saw a fairy. So as we were talking, she's like, "Oh my gosh, mom, I see the light. I see the fairy outside our window." And you know what I did? I fostered and nurtured that. And I asked her to tell me exactly where she saw it so I can look for it too. I also talked through it with her. I asked if she was scared, and, I asked if she had any questions about it or what type of fairy even she thought it was. And I think she said it was like a nighttime fairy or a dreamland fairy because it was nearing bedtime. And so it was a really pivotal moment to this day that she remembers, where she saw, "Oh my gosh, I remember when I saw that fairy a couple years ago. That was really cool." And so it was something where I fostered, and to this day she remembers it. It was one of the most meaningful aspects of just our time talking about and honoring and fostering just the magical realm. And so for me, I was just really proud of myself as a mama, because that was for me like a moment where I recognized that I did foster and nurture that enough where 2 years later she remembered that moment. And I don't think it's something that will ever go away as a result, because she has fostered such a deep connection now to fairies, where we have a fairy garden, and she has fairy books and things like that, again going back to a lot of me not wanting her to lose that magic. And so lessons learned moving forward with that has been continue to nurture that, right? Like, as especially with parents, and children who are interested in these things, or who actually see these different spirits and these different luminary beings, nurture and foster that, right? And so because one of the common mistakes as parents that we do, especially as they get older, and we begin to lose that spark ourselves when it comes to nurturing, like the tooth fairy and getting into it, we start dismissing them, right? We start discouraging their mystical experiences, especially children too, who have imaginary friends, or who actually see spirits. We begin to either dismiss or don't view it as important. And in their eyes, you not viewing it as important, it begins to dim their experiences as well, right? You, as a parent, not nurturing and honoring and cheering, right? Or supporting their mystical experiences, we start to dim their lights as a result. And it's and then as they get older, especially children who actually are still like have this gift that they see auras, or they see these spirits, or they see these luminary beings, or they have these imaginary friends, they start packing those gifts away in a backpack or in a suitcase that over the years become long forgotten. Their gifts become long forgotten, um, as a result of either being dismissed, as a result of even some of the trauma around it, right? Because these types of children, these empaths, these star seeds, these light bringers, they also tend to be very sensitive, very like highly sensitive. And so when we start to shun their gifts, when we start to dismiss them, this is something that can also bring deep trauma to their spirit. And as a result, they start hiding it, or they start just continue to pack it away, and they become adults who are not really tapped into their gifts anymore because it's a point of heartache for them, right? It's a point of, oh, this gift that they came to this world for, right? These psychics, these seers, these light bringers, these healers, like these gifts that they came to this planet for, they were shunned at a young age, and therefore it's a point of trauma. Like these unique healing gifts that they have is a point of trauma, and they learn not to use them. They learned not to bring their light forward as a result. And instead, as parents, as these children step into their gifts, as they begin to share what they see with you, right? To share, like if they see spirits, you are their safest person, right? In their orbit, you as a parent hold this sacred responsibility to be the safe adult in their life that they can share these experiences with. And so, what we need to do as parents is to validate them, right? To validate their experience, to honor what they're experiencing, to nurture what they're experiencing so that it's not scary, so that it's not something where they feel like an other, right? Because they're experiencing this. Because a lot of times, maybe their peers may not experience what they see. They may not see the same things. Some of their peers may not even have imaginary friends or see auras or spirits or able to see things, right? That is outside of the ordinary realm. And so as a parent, fostering that, first coming with curiosity, right? Especially if this is not like a gift that you have yourself as a parent, or something that you may not have experienced as often or even heard of, right? For some of you all. So stepping into their space and their world with curiosity and asking them, well, tell me more about this. Where did you see the spirit? What color was it? What did it do? Right? So that you're coming forward with more of getting to know their experience, getting to know their inner world, and then validate them, right? Rather than just saying this is pretend, or you need to stop this, right? Or you need to stifle this, right? Because a lot of times, in order to fit in, these are the things that we tell our children, and instead just coming forward with them with an open sense of curiosity to really get to know your child, right? So you really get to know what they're experiencing. And I also think about it too from a trauma informed lens, where when we step into this space where with our children, they then began to feel safe because you're not stepping into their space and pushing them out of that space, or you're not stepping into their space in order to control their experience, right? You're stepping into their world and their space and having a sense of fostering a trusting and safe relationship with your child. So that looks like active listening, that looks like validating their experiences, right? Coming again with curiosity. All of these things foster trust and is part of what it means to be like in a trauma informed space, right? Where we're not pushing our children out of their comfort zone in a sense, right? But they're coming to us and you are in their bubble, and a safe and respected and trust haven, essentially. And then the other thing that you give your child is this sense of empowerment, right? Because you're trusting them, and in turn, they're trusting you, but you're also trusting them to share their experience in a way that allows them to be their full selves, right? Which fosters agency, right? Because the child then, because you're listening, because you're honoring them, because you're validating them, they get to share and they get to say and recognize that what they're experiencing is real. What they're experiencing is not pretend, and that gives them this a sense of not only safety, but a sense of empowerment that allows them to know that their decision, what they see, actually supports the experiences that they're experiencing, right? What they see is not fake or pretend. They're actually experiencing a reality that needs to be validated and honored and nurtured, right? In a way that fosters safety. And the other part to that too is that sometimes it may be scary for children, right? To be to see, especially in a world that doesn't talk about these things often, or if they do, it's either taboo or it's something where it's not normalized, right? It's not normal. And so sometimes when these children experience these extra sensorial senses, they may be scared, they may be afraid. And again, because you are the safest person in their world as a parent, as someone who sees them and takes care of them, you're going to be the first person that they share this to with. And so your first reaction, your initial reaction, and I would say instead of reaction, right, your initial response also sets the pace for these other experiences that they might have, right? In terms of whether they feel comfortable or feel safe enough to share these constant experiences with you. And so, with that, your child may be afraid. So, understanding what some of their triggers are. For example, children who are highly sensitive and highly perceptual, they may be afraid to go in a room by themselves, or they may be afraid to sleep right in a room by themselves. Or they may hear, I remember as a child that was actually my experience, because I was so sensitive, right? Like extra perceptual to these other realms. I wouldn't hear them all the time, but I did hear things, right? I call myself clear audio. I did hear things. And so I would be afraid to go in a room by myself, especially if it was dark. I co-slept with my mom, and it's so funny because my children, especially my girl, she's very similar. She's clairvoyant. And so she has these extra perceptual senses where sometimes, not all the time, but sometimes she does see spirits, for example. And when she does share these things with me, I honor where she's at. I ask her questions because I don't want it to be scary for her, right? I want her to feel that not only is she in a safe space, but that we are also supportive of her experiences and supportive of her fears as well. And how can we best help her not feel afraid to go in the room, right? And so this is something where we're still working on with her. We literally have to go in her room with her, right, to get a toy or something like that, especially at night or when it's dark, because of that fear. So understanding what some of your children's triggers are around some of these various ways of extra perceptual senses, and then figuring out with your child how you can best support them navigate day-to-day life, that works for the both of you. Right. And then the other thing with that, that fosters connection, that fosters trust, and most importantly, I would say like positive interactions, right? Because again, you're not only exploring what your child is experiencing, you're also supporting them in the way that helps them navigate these different experiences. And then the other part to that is, I talk about a lot about co-regulation because I believe it's the deep foundation of emotional maturity, emotional attachment, healthy attachment, and connection. And so processing these experiences with your child, honoring where their boundaries are around some of their triggers and their fears, helps to breed this wonderful positive interaction and co-regulation that is a mesh, right, that happens in a mesh, which allows your child to feel supported all around. And then the other one is the open communication. So for example, having an honest and supportive dialogue with your child on, okay, what are some of the things that, you know, that when do you see these spirits? When does that occur? Right? Is there a trigger when that happens? Is there a time of day when that happens? Right? Really getting to know your child's inner world in that way, so that way you know then as a parent how you can best support your child's extra perceptual experiences, and even being able to know maybe if there's a pattern when they occur. And then, I would say as a parent, knowing when to really be fully present with your child, because that is what fosters safety, and I would say even spiritual safety, because it's so important, especially children who are spiritually attuned that way. They need it the most, right? They need that sense of safety. And again, one of the reasons is because if that doesn't happen, all of these things that I talked about with how to nurture and support them when they're and as they're experiencing these different perceptual ways, it risks then just being a traumatic event for them time and time again. If they hear, right, if they're clear audio and they hear these things and that's not nurtured, or they're clairvoyant and they see these spirits, or they see fairies, or they see imaginary friends, or they hear them, and that's not nurtured, right, or fostered and supported, then yes, these become points of trauma for your child time and time again. And then they don't know how to, as they get older, how to nurture and support and regulate themselves in that way when these events occur. And so as you're honoring and fostering and supporting your child through these experiences, then you're raising children, right, who feel safe. They feel safe as they explore these unique experiences. They feel safe to explore with you their inner world. And so I have just a couple more practical tips on how you can support your child as they're experiencing these things. And one is to create safe storytelling time, especially in the tender years, right? When they're younger, part of the way that they get to share these experiences with you is through storytelling. Whether it's you maybe just kind of opening up that space with sharing, if you even experienced that as a young child, sharing how you experience these um extra perceptual sensors, or how you experience your clear audio ways, or how you experience, like if you had imaginary friends as a child, what happened, what were some of the conversations that you all had, what were some of the adventures even that you all went on. So just to really, I would say, normalize, right, these experiences with your child so that they feel then safe enough to vocalize what they're experiencing in their inner world as well. And then the other, I would say, is to create rituals that honor their inner world. For example, with my child, we have a fairy garden. And sometimes when we go on family walks, some of the rituals that we'll do is that we'll pick up, especially during springtime when it's really pretty outside and there's lots of flowers and special, so even like special rocks, you'll come back and we'll collect these different things for the fairy garden and we'll place them around the fairy altar, around the fairy garden. And that is one of like her safe places where she knows that this is an exchange, or this is the way that she can communicate with the fairies. Um, the other one that we did actually for many years was, she would write letters to the fairies, right? And she would get a response, a letter back from the fairies, right? So these are some, and it's just very excited. And these are some of the ways that we normalize what is happening in their inner world, normalizing imagination, right? Normalizing what they're experiencing so that it's a part of their external world as well as their internal world. And then some grounding practices too, right? If they're feeling overwhelmed, one of my favorite ones that I recommend parents do is to have a calm space, a calm area in your home where if your child is feeling overwhelmed or overstimulated, or they just need a sacred space to go to, right? Let's say if they've experienced seeing a spirit or seeing a fairy or light being, and maybe they're rattled, right? Or if it's too much for them, having a calm space in your home, maybe having crystals, like some grounding crystals or some scents, or coloring sheet, anything with drawing. Maybe they can draw what they saw, or have a music station, right, with headphones, just something that helps bring them back and ground them back to this realm and this reality so they can settle in their bodies as well. So I hope this was helpful. Please feel free to share with me too if you have any special stories with your child and what they're experiencing and how they've experienced these extra perceptual spiritual realms, because our children are tapped in many different ways to the spiritual realm, especially in their tender ages. Feel free to share any stories that you'd like with me. I'd love to hear from you and your personal experiences. And if you have any questions too, and how to support your child as they navigate these, I am happy to share more with you. And speaking of which, I also have an upcoming webinar on June 13th on how to nurture and support your child, your extra perceptual, highly sensitive child through presence, play, and ritual. Stay tuned. Follow me on social media and stay tuned for where you can register for this free webinar. All right. I look forward to hearing from you. Have a beautiful, beautiful day or night. Hello, beautiful ones. If you are raising a highly sensitive, intuitive, and gifted child and want to know how to nurture and support them through presence, play, and ritual, I have an upcoming webinar on June 13th. Sign up in the show notes below to save your spot. Look, you know your child is different. Maybe they talk to imaginary friends or deeply intuitive and say things that they couldn't possibly know, that they're out of this world. You've tried so many different techniques. I will be offering a container where I show you how to support and nurture your child, your wonderful, unique child, through presence, play, and ritual. If this resonates, please register. I can't wait to hear from you.